Patricia, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Andy.
I am thrilled to have you joining me here today to talk about this period of film, these post-war domestic melodramas, as Hollywood kind of pejoratively used to call women's pictures.
Yeah.
I'd love, before we really kick in and dig into all of this, I'd love to know, like, what is your history with this cycle, or what kind of draws you to it?
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, I've always been a fan of what I didn't know was called the women's picture.
Yeah.
And that was a bit anachronistic because, I'm it's my mother's generation of movies, but I loved Betty Davis and Barbara Stanwyck. I loved Joan Fontaine. So I loved certain movies that were in circulation on, uh, broadcast TV, probably terrible prints on weird channels.
Yeah.
And I always was drawn to those. And then I was fortunate enough to go to college at the moment of sort of the rediscovery of the women's picture. So I was instantly drawn to the classes that, represented my overlapping interests. So I took women's studies and I took film studies. And the women's studies that I was looking at was not really, was not taking these works seriously, because so many of them are very much about what you can do with women's powerlessness, right? Which is a lot, it turns out. But the film classes were really highlighting the sort of explosion of interest in the melodrama, I'd say, as almost an overarching category for Hollywood film, right? I mean, almost all classical Hollywood is drama told through music as well as other things, but the melos, was pretty heavy duty, like really heavily romantic music scores telling you what to feel in pretty much any mode of filmmaking. And then the newspapers called many things melodramas that we today would not call melodramas. Oh, this is a crime melodrama, this is a whatever. But what was happening in the scholarship, and this was really, I think, the heyday of film studies kind of coming into the academy and saying, let's take previously kind of low culture forms seriously. And that was the movies in general, maybe in the 70s. But by the 80s, that was the trivialized movies like the women's picture, right? So now, while some women's pictures like Gone with the Wind, have the respect of multiple Oscars and, huge box office, a lot of the films that were being kind of taken up, and this is by both male critics who were really auteurist and kind of mise-en-scène oriented, and an emerging feminist, cadre of critics who were interested in, say, the source material or the stars or the actual history of what was happening around gender in the 40s and 50s. And most of these critics were either British or American. So in those countries, they were all kind of converging around a reevaluation of melodrama and thinking of it as maybe one of the ways that Hollywood did what it did best, which is take kind of a small scale. And if you think of like that square, which is the screen, and think of it as like a window into like a domestic space, and tell a story in a really condensed period of time. Fortunately, most movies then were shorter than they are now. In a pretty bounded space, and that was about characters, and that were about characters who were iconic in some way because they were played by stars. So they had baggage of what the star brought, all of that kind of focused energy and sort of intensity kind of was there in the melodrama. And that just was like a field day for critics.
Yeah.
So I was super excited to take a melodrama class that spanned, whatever, D.W. Griffith, of course, to contemporary soap operas. And there still were a lot of daytime soap operas in the 70s. And some of them, I'm thinking of like Barbara Rush. I'm thinking some of them had actors in them who had played in 40s and 50s women's pictures, right?
Gotcha.
There's just a real continuity of a storytelling form that had always been sort of aimed at women, but periodically tried to be kind of lifted up into sort of general interest, kind of the general interest in the post-war period. We'll get into it, like by the 50s was like sex or, secrets, or would get lifted up into general interest because, oh my God, Jean-Luc Godard thinks that Nicholas Ray is, an axiom of the cinema, is cinema. They would periodically be lifted up as something that was worthy of study. And that tension between their popularity and their kind of like triviality or lowbrow status, but also kind of well-knownness. Like you could kind of say Stella Dallas and you'd, know that meant maternal sacrifice and that, had some significance even for like the women's movement, that there was some intensity there. And that had this kind of critical attention that was pretty avid. That was just very intoxicating, right? You could love these movies on the emotional level. You could like expand on them on the intellectual level. So that's, I guess, what we're going to do today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, real quick, just before we keep going, your microphone, it's getting a lot of plosives.
I'm getting purpose. Okay.
Yeah. Can you just move it maybe to your right a little bit and then just angle it toward you just so your plosives aren't hitting it directly?
Let's try me saying my name, which is Patty.
Well, yes, but you got to say it with the energy and the fervor that you're speaking.
So Peyton Place.
Yeah, see, the P on Peyton hit a little bit.
So angle it towards me as in lower than my lips?
Or just move it to your side just so when you're speaking, the air coming out of your mouth isn't hitting it. It's kind of...
It's going to go to the left. Okay.
Okay, yeah.
So now I'm going to say Peyton Place enthusiastically. Okay.
There you go.
Thank you.
Awesome.
You'll cut that?
Yeah. I'll get all that up. So.
Okay. Do you need me to repeat anything that was plosive?
No, I should be able to clean all that up in the edit.
Sorry about
I just don't want to clean the whole thing up.
I'm an enthusiastic person.
No, I love it. It's fantastic. Well, this is going to be a great conversation. I'm looking forward to digging into this. Just so people know, we're going to be moving chronologically through 10 films, some on the main show, and then we're going to save 5 for the members. The films we're looking at from 1945, Mildred Pierce. Also 1945, Leave Her to Heaven. 1949, The Reckless Moment. 1952, The Bad and the Beautiful. 1955, All That Heaven Allows. 1956, Written on the Wind. Also 1956, Bigger Than Life. 1959, Imitation of Life. 1960, Home from the Hill. And 1961, The Children's Hour. If you'd like to access the member content, you can join for $5 a month or $55 a year. Just head to truestory.fm/join. That's truestory.fm/join to learn more. So before we really dig in, I want to kind of like macroscopically just figure out like, why is this important to talk about? Mm-hmm. And to get us there, before we do that, I really want to figure out and talk to you about the distinction between drama and melodrama and why they operate differently. I found this quote from Sidney Lumet in Making Movies, his book, that says, "In drama, the characters should determine the story. In melodrama, the story determines the characters." And then he also went on to say, "Melodrama is a much maligned genre. I always think of melodrama as the thing we are all capable of that's swept under the rug." So there's a lot, I think, in there as to what he's saying about the emotion. And I don't know, is it at the expense of realism? Like, what are we looking at when we say drama, melodrama?
Yeah, that's an interesting distinction. And, I'll go back to saying that the melos in the
Yeah.
drama. The music is sort of generally speaking pervasive. It's cueing feeling. And so emotion, which can have a lot of realism in it,
Yeah.
is predominating over sort of, drama in the sense of like an Aristotelian drama of, there's going to be a tragedy and a downfall, or even like a crime drama in which it's driven by plot, right? You're entering a space in which, and I'll generalize the melos, the music, to all the expressive elements of cinema that are included in like mise en scène. So, the decor, the blocking, the costumes, the jewelry, the things that, again, as Lumet said, you kind of want to pretend aren't important. But you cannot sweep them under the rug because they are so determinative of how you're responding. So drama, maybe characters, I'm not recalling the quote specifically. What was he
Characters, the in drama, the characters should determine the story. In
Yeah.
melodrama, the story determines the characters.
Right. And so those characters are pre-given. I mean, it's not like, it's like commedia dell'arte in that way, that there's the victim, there's the villain. If you go back to real, silent melodrama or stage melodrama, there's an instant recognizability to the character, and it's not about their interiority, even though it might be about their emotion. It's not about their psychological problems, although all of these films are that we're going to talk about are pervaded by pop psychology, Freudian psychology, as it entered, the US big time in this period. They're representing emotional states, or they're representing iconic positions like the mother, the father, the social outcast, the juvenile delinquent. So the drama determines the characters in the sense that they don't really have control over their fate, right? And that's kind of what we're getting into. We're getting into this kind of witnessing of chance, coincidence, sometimes pretty major action, even though we're looking at mostly domestic melodramas that are confined spatially, and that these things are we're more witnesses to what happens to these characters than like getting inside their heads and figuring out like what we would do if we were them. It's almost like we're like watching the whole thing like, right? So we're all capable of it, if that's what Lumet said. Indeed, the common sense version of melodrama is like overacting or exaggerating, or reliance on coincidence, or the last minute rescue, or the arriving too late. All of those things, they have their, as I said before, emotional realism insofar as the sense of helplessness or righteousness that many of these characters feel are really kind of primal reasons for like engaging in spectatorship, any kind of entertainment. We want to see these like archetypal characters and events. So yeah, and then it is maligned, and it's maligned because it's associated with women and with the powerless. And that I think is the other big insight, which is that stories about the powerless are universal because we really don't have power over our fates. And so if we could destigmatize that association, then like the female character or the sort of, racially marginalized character that we might see in like later melodramas or social problem films, those are situations that socially are, not unrealistic, but that we're kind of making the position universal. And it's not something we want to do. We don't want to say we're victims.
Right, and I think that's interesting because the way I'm hearing that is that they each have their place. Drama can do some things that melodrama can't, but melodrama can do some things that drama can't.
Yeah.
And looking at the excess and the feelings like that come spilling out, right? Like the internal of those stories, and I think it's very important, and I think there's absolutely a place for it.
In the dark, especially.
Right. Exactly. Well, and in the dark, and I wanted to bring this up too, because I think just talking about the importance of this, especially as we're looking at post-war domestic melodramas, I think that there's definitely a conversation to be had about that connection to film noir, which is, I just talked about that last month, and how there's a lot of the same underlying pressures in these stories. There's also a sense that desire is dangerous, right? We see a lot of, and the first few films we're going to be talking about definitely are overlapping those two genres.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So should we go for it?
Well, yeah. So I want to move into the origins, and I want to kind of talk about like where all of this starts, right? You mentioned earlier things like Stella Dallas and films that were earlier that are certainly what we would call the domestic melodrama, but at what point does it become post-war domestic melodrama?
Yeah.
And like, it didn't just start in 1945 with Mildred Pierce. Like, there's roots that we're going to be looking at. Yeah. And so I'm curious about, with the domestic melodramas that had already been established in the 30s and 40s, and even earlier, going, as you said, all the way back to
silent era,
the silent era, absolutely,
or to the 19th century, if you read stage.
I mean, stage, novels. I think there's a lot of places where we're getting a lot of these types of stories. How did Hollywood tap into what the audience wanted to start developing these stories?
Yeah, that's great. No, I think the designation post-war is really important. I think we went back and forth a little bit. Does that mean 50s or 40s? Yeah. And I really like that we hit 45, which is, the moment, the end of the war.
Yeah.
So the women's picture, I think, in the scholarship at least, is considered to be, already very dominant in the 1930s. And then in the 40s, to answer your question about why the industry was, so hot to go there, was because the audience was predominantly female during the war, because men were at least perceived to be overseas fighting the war. So the upswing in films aimed shamelessly at women's audiences, and starring female stars who were not necessarily like glamorously beautiful, like Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, was, in part an economic decision. And a lot of those 1940s films aimed at the domestic audience in the sense of, not abroad. Because those women were in fact not particularly domestic during that time. They're working in war plants, right? That the films that were aimed at them tended to be even more about the central female character, and the paradoxes, as I kind of mentioned before, of her passivity and powerlessness, even as she's commanding this, incredible, emotional, I'm thinking of like Bette Davis pretending that she can see even though she's going blind in order so that her husband doesn't know in Dark Victory.
Right.
Even a title like Dark Victory, it's like
Yeah.
the things that are held in tension there are crazy. So I absolutely adore 1940s melodramas. And I do think that they were more directed towards women's audiences. So what we see in this shift to this post-war is a sense of both, did we empower women too much by moving them into the workforce? And that's both white women
Interesting, yeah.
in the war industry and Black women maybe moving them into the war effort because they're already in the workforce.
Yeah.
Did we empower them too much? And now we have to teach them some lessons, and we'll teach them the lessons in these melodrama, these very paradoxical dark victories that are happening always in these films, where like the woman is like done all this stuff and then she's like, oh, all I really wanted was to get married to this guy at the end, and you're like, okay, right.
Yeah, that redomestication, I think, is such an interesting part of all of this.
It absolutely.
Thanks for your help. Now go back to the house. Right.
Exactly. And so the shift really has tensions at this point, and that's when, in the scholarship, they started being called family melodramas, or as we get into the 50s, they're about Eisenhower America and the contradictions of the family under kind of post-war capitalism and social conformity, moving to the suburbs, having this life with the car and the picture window where everyone could, look into your home as if it were a movie screen, and probably see your television in there. Travel, all of the sort of spectacular elements that we start to see, Technicolor, widescreen, exotic locations, really amping up domestic decor. And I'm sorry, I am a film geek, so I have to say that during the 30s, when there's a depression, we also have an amping up of domestic decor, like with these incredible Art Deco interiors that no one could afford, but that's why you went to the movies, because you saw them there. So you have this shift towards an audience that's understood to be, maybe led by the decision of the woman who picked the movie, but not exclusively female. And the protagonists are by no means, in the set of films that we're going to look at, the soldiering on, woman. There's all kinds of pathologies that come up in the family. So we have these paternal pathologies. We have the problem of youth that's going to go astray. And we have all this popular sociology coming out, like Organization Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, this book called Generation of Vipers that blames moms for the sapping of the energy of the American male. These books are being read by the screenwriters, and they're kind of popping up in some of the pop psychology. So it's a really troubled period in terms of what messages we want from what the American family should be. And it's also a troubled period, as any film historian will say, in terms of the studio system, right? So we start out with movies, made during a year when everyone's going to the movies, like 1946, and we end up in 1961 where we're like, oh my God, I think we're going to have to do something. We've already had, the divestment of the studios of their movie theaters, but we're also going to finally have to do something about this production code and let something more adult come into the movies, because we have a Supreme Court decision about the movie should actually be treated as protected speech and be able to. So there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of contradiction, and that happens in the movies, each of these movies too.
Yeah, and I think just other things that I've been thinking about, I think the women coming home, but also there's just a boom of suburbs, right? Of the whole space with the GI
Mhm.
Bill, and looking at places like Levittown,
Yeah.
which is kind of
Yeah.
like the cookie cutter
Yeah.
style that we'll kind of see as these homes become like the American dream.
Yeah.
And also we're looking at the kind of that whole ideology of containment with the fear of communism and everything
Mhm.
that's been going,
Yeah.
and starting to do more policing with gender and sexuality and normalcy. We'll just put in quotes.
Yeah,
And
very
I
much
think,
so.
yeah, there's a lot of that stuff, with all. And then as you mentioned, like TV is kicking off, and we're
Speaking of
starting.
containment, like taking
Yeah.
this
Oh, I
big
know.
widescreen thing, and at least two of these movies have like two of the best television
Yeah, one of
takedown.
the most iconic TV shots in film is
Yeah.
in one of these films.
And two of
Absolutely.
them actually, and
Yeah.
I think both bigger than life. Maybe that's bonus content.
Yeah.
And All That Heaven Allows have like the best TV scenes. Yeah.
Yeah. I all right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Let me get that one in there. So one thing I like to talk about is like where these things fit in the cinematic family tree.
Yeah.
We this kind of fits. I don't know. I guess I'm curious. Where do you stand with this? Are we calling this a genre, a subgenre, a cycle, a mood? Like, what is the
Yeah.
post-war domestic melodrama? Let's start
Yeah.
there.
I think that's great. We're I think like I'm going to, be a scholar for a minute and, say that there's so much debate about melodrama, and no, it's not a genre. So melodrama is a mode. I mean, we've
Yeah.
already kind of talked about like it's a mode of storytelling that happens through things other than the drama itself, right?
Yeah.
It's not. It's less about the script and more about the affective, expressive elements. So, but I would say that there's a cycle. I don't know that the 10 films that we are going to talk about are all sort of in the same cycle. But I do think, and this might be again the influence of auteurist critics on me, but the idea of a sort of family melodrama or domestic melodrama that's distinctively post-war, that includes Technicolor films by Nick Ray, Vicente Minnelli, and most notably Douglas Sirk, is a cycle. I mean, there's definitely a sense in an economic way that people are at studio folks are saying, this is working, let's do more of it. And that's a cycle. So I think I would put it there.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, I think you could almost see like the different genres that we're tapping into in that mode or
That's
the
right.
cycle. Like there's a maternal melodrama with things like Mildred Pierce and Imitation of Life, suburban containment stories, masculine domestic crisis in a couple of our
Yeah,
stories.
male weepies. Yeah, male
right.
melodramas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some gothic desire, coded desire. We certainly are going to talk about. We also have an industry melodrama, which will be an interesting one to throw into the mix. So I think that it's certainly fascinating. How would you say that it evolved over this period of time? Because I mean, obviously, what we're looking at does kind of come to an end, like right about the Children's Hour, our last film we're talking about, 1961, where things kind of shift into more of a look at kind of like social issues and become like the social issues film. So from like the beginning of like the post-war cycle to the end, like, do you see an evolution?
Amongst the films that we're going to talk about, yes, I think we go from some of the traditional women's picture concerns to bigger canvas, both literally in terms of widescreen and like these kind of social problem things. And the 60s are going to kind of, I think we have, I think the social problem films that Children's Hour represents started in the 40s too, right? So those are all so in some ways I wouldn't use that as an endpoint. We have late films like Home from the Hill, and I guess we have a lot of just carryover into television. So there's not really an end to the domestic melodrama. Some of these, like Peyton Place, which was on our original list, becomes, one of the most important. So,
boy, did that go on forever.
Yeah. in the 60s, precisely the 60s. But we do have a sense that old Hollywood is kind of dead by, you have Sound of Music in 1964, but then you have Bonnie and Clyde in 1967. So you have a sense that these are kind of dying with old Hollywood. So like late melodrama is kind of like late noir, where there's just these internal things showing up and becoming more and more out of control, kind of preparing the ground for the upsurge that will be, new Hollywood. And we don't need the coded sex of the domestic melodramas when we get a serious influx of foreign films, which is happening during this period, and there's explicit sex in those. I guess cinema appreciation is also happening around that time. So you start to get, cage cinema, like discovering all these auteurs, that getting translated into the US, the look for new directors. So I guess there's just a long transition period from, the sort of mid 50s to the mid 60s, where some of the juiciest, weirdest movies are made, not only in domestic melodramas, but noir, etc.
Across the board.
So why is the need for it over? I think a lot of things. And we're like High and Red Scare. We have a film like Johnny Guitar that's not on our list because it's a Western, but it's also.
I did talk about that in my post-war Westerns conversation.
Okay, great. So you have, and that's Nick Ray, and it's kind of resembling in some ways the same. I mean, there's the desire problem, and the decor kind of taking over. So you have, I guess the question is there an evolution, maybe devolution? into
and I think that's kind of like how I look at it, because I mean in the beginning it definitely feels like very noirish, like we're seeing a lot of the kind of the darkness and really kind of that post-war readjustment, and everybody's kind of like just this more psychological dread sort of weighing into those, and then it kind of explodes, as you already said, with the cinemascope and the Technicolor and just the beautiful widescreen interiors that we're getting and the outfits and everything. And then it seems like with the collapse of the production code and how we start seeing it cracking and everything, it just seems, I don't know, I guess the way that I would look at it is there's kind of a mutation of the post-war, specifically the post-war domestic melodrama that kind of shifts into more social problem films, the new Hollywood, and specifically the TV soap operas. I think that's really kind of where we end up seeing it go. Yeah.
And I think the TV soap operas that are on screen, like if you think even of the ways that, I don't know, the other, like the Rock Hudson, Doris Day comedy, sex comedies, the there's an adjacency to that kind of TV ready, banter oriented, and you have like Peyton Place, like some of them are made in the 60s of these the end game. I think it's a
plus Douglas Sirk leaves. Maybe we'll just call that the real marker.
I think the funeral at the end of Imitation of Life kind of is probably, in some ways, the death knell of a certain kind of Hollywood, both sophistication and, profligacy in terms of emotion and a certain kind of production value spending. And it's a good place to end.
Right. It's very, very fitting. All right. Well, before we get into the films, just a quick note again for listeners who want to go deeper. The conversation you're going to be hearing today is the public episode, 5 films, a full exploration of the cycle. But Patricia and I are actually discussing 10 films total. The 5 you won't hear today, Leave Her to Heaven, The Bad and the Beautiful, Written on the Wind, Imitation of Life, and The Children's Hour, are part of the extended member discussion. And honestly, they're going to be rich conversations. So if you want to access those and every other member bonus episode, you can join for $5 a month or $55 a year at truestory.fm/join. Check it out. We'll be right back. All right, you ready to start digging into some of these movies?
Yes.
All right, we're going to start with Mildred Pierce from 1945, directed by Michael Curtiz. Mildred Pierce is a divorcee who builds a successful restaurant business from nothing to provide for her daughters, particularly her cold, ambitious daughter, Veda. The film frames her story as a noir mystery, opening with a murder and a police interrogation before flashing back to show how Mildred got there. This is, we're kind of looking at this as kind of the origin point for our conversation. We've got maternal ambition, we've got class aspiration, the home as kind of an economy. Everything here that we're talking about is all wrapped in this noir of a woman put on trial, essentially from the first frame of the movie. And I think that's a great place to start, is this noir wrapper for this that we're looking at, right? There's flashback. We've got this murder mystery going on. She's a suspect before we even know her story. And Joan Crawford, I mean, come on, she is such a star in this movie. And you know, having talked about her in Sudden Fear in the noir conversation last time, I mean, she's a powerhouse of a performer, and this was kind of a reinvention for her, because she had kind of been written off by Hollywood up to this point, right?
Yeah, no, this was, everything was riding on this film for her. So Warner Brothers film, so, you know, black and white, made with, you know, the kind of tightness of the reins around, like, you know, how it's going to look. It's not the lavishness of the other things that we're going to see. And that wraparound is an add-on, right? It's an add-on to both the James M. Cain novel, which comes out in the 30s, and is about the Depression. And the movie, you know, feels like a Depression era kind of, there's a Depression era ethos in it. And Joan Crawford starred in so many of those Depression era women's pictures. So there's this kind of interesting throwback to that. But the first script for the film followed, you know, the book, and they were sent back to put this kind of noir wraparound on it. It's you know, sort of a self-indulgent thing for me to say, but I do want to say that there are noirish elements in women's pictures from the beginning of the 40s, and I would start with Rebecca there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there's a whole cycle of, you know, the way they're lit, some of the themes are kind of infiltrating women's pictures proper, but and there's, I guess, crime in that. But this one, turning it into, like, you know, we have the crime investigation paralleling the story, and we get flashbacks narrated, but not fully, by Mildred Pierce telling the story, makes this, like, you know, very firmly at least passed off as a film noir. So one of the big contradictions is that film noirs don't generally even go into people's houses. Like, they go into their apartments, you know, their, you know, special, like, you know, whatever, LA bungalows. Like, domesticity and domestic roles are usually excluded from the noir world, which is a nighttime world. So Mildred Pierce is, you know, in many parts of it, very much a daytime film. So how does that work? Well, that's, you know, catnip for the feminist critic, right? Because you're like, you know, you said it, you know, what is her crime? And her crime, you know, is loving her daughter too much. She has 2 daughters, one of whom is a, you know, tomboy, actually, you know, good-natured kid who conveniently dies, so that the exclusive relationship between Mildred Pierce and her walked off the set of a film noir daughter, Veda, can be really at the focus of the script. So there's some continuity there between like sort of the over closeness of Stella Dallas and her daughter that's so,
Oh, sure.
overpowering that she has to send her daughter away because her class background presents issues for her daughter's capacity to rise socially, which again is a 30s Depression era narrative. So what do we do in this moment so I think it's important that Mildred Pierce is kind of shot during the war. Like, it is a wartime film. It's legitimately like, let's make a women's picture, maternal melodrama. But it doesn't get released until, people are coming back. So what should that look like? And its relationship to the war is very strange. Like, there's references to, not having stockings, or the man shortage, which leaves us with all of these cads and losers that are make it impossible for this, all the labor, all the decision making, all of the earning, all of the screen time really is for the women. So it's very contradictory that way.
Well, and there's an interesting element with Mildred also that I think, this again is post-war, and she's a worker. She's a businesswoman. She starts up her own business, and the film frames it as something that she's a success. It's an achievement, but also it feels like there's a little bit of a transgression. The way that the Veda sees it, it's like, you're not giving me what I need. You need to be married to somebody who has all this money, and like that's the only way that you can actually have really provided for me.
Yeah, we're getting a really like punishing for her career ambition. So you can't both be a mother and a career woman, and your maternity. And that is the book that I referenced before, Generation of Vipers, I think is really important here, because there is a pathologizing of Mildred's affection for Vida and her ambitions for her, and her and the daughter has a weird notion of class. So she's very her mother smells of grease. Her mother's business is not, cosmetics, which is like where some of the earliest women entrepreneurs, both black and white, kind of made their fortunes. It's domestic. It's cooking fried chicken, chicken and waffles joints all up and down the coast. When the neon is great. And you mentioned the cookie cutter homes. Her husband originally was kind of a real estate guy. He's not very effective. They first restaurant that Mildred takes over is in a model home, right? Or at least in the book it is. I don't know how explicit it is, but it's like the idea that there's a kind of what we call it the second shift, like women who work and then, go home and still work. This is also women who cook and then go to work and still cook. So Mildred isn't sufficiently consumerist. And her daughter wants the magic of post-war consumerism, where you don't see the labor to happen. And you mentioned Joan Crawford. She did win the Oscar for it. She, kind of was so worried she wouldn't, that she didn't go. So she had to get it. Very drama there. But, you must have said this in Sudden Fear. Like, she is not the subtlest actress. And a critic who writes about fashion and how important fashion is in women's pictures and in these domestic melodramas, talks about the sort of first introduction to Mildred, where she's wearing this enormous fur coat with these enormous shoulder pads that has such a tactility to it that she's like, the coat is where the feeling is. Like, the tactility of the coat is the feeling, because Mildred's face, Joan Crawford's face, is like, blank. That's kind of an aside, but I think it's her performance and the kind of, it becomes for us retroactively such an important film because of the revelations around Joan Crawford's own parenting, and the way that she's played in Mommy Dearest
Faye
by Faye
Dunaway. Yeah.
Dunaway, that just show her as being kind of a monstrous mother. So I think the film is very sympathetic to Mildred, and to go back to the fact that she does get to narrate her own story. I mean, it starts, I feels like I was born in a kitchen, right? That's a funny thing to say to the detective investigating the murder of your, no good second husband, right? So the film is goes back and forth between putting us in this place where we are deeply empathic with Mildred, and her female friendship, and also sort of judging of her excesses and bad decisions. I mean, like,
Oh, yeah.
don't marry that Monty guy,
Right. Some
maybe
clear
don't wear
signs.
that swimsuit. I mean, swim cap.
Right. Yeah. Well, okay. So how with the way fitting into like this post-war domestic melodrama mode, how do you view the ending? Do you view that it punishes her,
Yeah.
or does it return her to, like, is it a defeated freedom? Like,
I don't think
all
she's
of it?
free. I
Yeah.
mean, I'll mention Race, which is pretty underground. I mean, and it's the kind of, paradoxical that, like, Walter White and the campaign to make Hollywood sign on the part of the NAACP to make Hollywood, not have such stereotypical representations of African Americans based on their contributions to the war, has the ironic effect of, basically having no Black people in many of these movies. But so I'm circling back to your question about the end, which is that we have her literally kind of walking into the dawn, remarried to a man that she seems to have very little affinity with, or, getting back with her first husband. And white women cleaning the floor of the courthouse. So we have this, like, no, I think she's free in relationship to her class, maybe, even though she might have lost all her money too, and is returned to kind of a domesticity. Vita's exit is my favorite, where she says, don't worry, I'll get by. She's off to women's prison. So, like, that, I want to see that movie.
Right.
But there are some tensions in the movie between working women and working class women, around race. And so Butterfly McQueen, who's unforgettable anytime she's on screen, is sort of hired to, help Mildred, and at certain points feels like they could do some of this work together. But at Vita's insistence, Butterfly McQueen becomes a status symbol, becomes a kind of reinscription of hierarchies of what kinds of acceptable womanhood there is during this period. So the ending of the film, by reminding us that there are working women, these women scrubbing, and maybe perhaps even reminding us of other working women of color, et cetera, or, it has a contradiction, but I think it's definitely, I feel like it's Molly Haskell in From Reverence to Rape, who calls it like the step down, the last 5 minutes of the woman's picture where, like, everything we've seen is erased, but it's also easy to forget it, kind of. I mean, it's easy to remember the 85 minutes before.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. Well, Mildred Pierce, let's move on to our next film. Mildred Pierce wrapped its critique in a noir frame, needing a murder mystery to give us permission to put a woman's ambition at the center. With Leave Her to Heaven, needs no such permission. This one opens in Technicolor and puts female desire front and center from the first frame, and then treats it as monstrous. In Leave Her to Heaven from 1945, directed by John M. Stahl, Ellen Barrett is a beautiful, wealthy woman who becomes obsessively devoted to her husband, Richard, so much so that she'll remove anyone she sees as a threat to their relationship, including his disabled brother and their unborn child. Shot in lush Technicolor, it is one of the most visually gorgeous films ever made about something so deeply disturbing. So with this film, one, daddy issues. Am I right? We've got a little Electra complex going on with this one. But I think I didn't know this. This was kind of called like the first major color noir. And that was interesting to me because you can definitely see that with the story here.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's such in some ways I'd say on our list, I wouldn't put it up there in terms of like, auteurist masterpiece where like many of the films on this list are.
Yeah.
I will go to the mat on the masterpiece word.
Yeah.
Leave Her to Heaven is crazy. And I love that you recall that it is a noir, because how can you have this much color, and it won like the cinematography Oscar, and you have Natalie Kalmus, who's the, on-set by, contract, Technicolor consultant, because of the process has to be done. I'm pretty sure she's credited on this one. There's another one where they have a different consultant, which I was surprised to see.
Right.
And CinemaScope. But we have a heroine who's a femme fatale. She's played by Jean Tierney. So we have a little, there's a little, I guess Laura comes out the next year. So it's not even really, we don't really know. But yes, I'm going to call it you call it Electra, and I think, let's keep it. I mean, that's the popular format, but the daddy stuff. This is a woman who loves too much and drives everyone around her to distraction. The fact that we stay with her and that she does die, as the production code would demand.
Yeah,
but even after her death, she's kind of pulling strings. So there's this, she wants to wreak havoc on the people who survive her through like poisoning herself, but framing somebody for it, and getting an old lover who happens to be the DA to make some fake case. I mean, it's just crazy. Stuff happens in this. And this is one of the few that I haven't I don't have ready to hand what its source material was, but obviously Mildred Pierce, was that was a hard-boiled writer. Right. This one feels like just like throw it all in there. And the most important, the takeaways from the film are just the craziness of her badness, and the locations, and the appropriate outfits to be worn in every location, right?
Oh, of course.
So,
well, I mean, is there? Yeah, go ahead.
I did want to. There was one connection to other melodramas, though, that I did want to make, which is John Stahl directed the previous version of Imitation of Life, one of the earliest versions of Love Affair, which is a much remade woman's picture. So has a lot of credibility from 30s vehicles for women. So the fact that this is a woman's picture in which she is thoroughly hateful, like love the villain, like love to hate, where it's the villainess. She's she's a soap opera character. I mean, she does things that women do in soap operas, like give herself a miscarriage, or switch out, whatever, poison for gardening, whatever. Those kinds of the deep attraction for the villain-ness, I think is just what this movie is about.
Well, and it's an interesting inversion to kind of what we're looking at with other of these films, where this is a woman who refuses sacrifice. She refuses to share. She refuses to be reasonable. In many ways, which I think is interesting. She's this monstrous character, but also the way the film kind of depicts it, she's really kind of the only fully alive woman that we have in the film. And so what is it saying about that? Is that like, is there a male gaze element to that? Like, you know, this is like an ideal woman, but if you have too much, then it's a monster. Like,
yeah, she's a femme fatale, but she's the heroine, and that's just like a kind of very strange place to be. I think there's a female gaze and a male gaze element. I mean, the female gaze, you know, whatever homoeroticism could be there, but also about like what she's wearing. Like she's just vividly the center of everything, and she always has like the appropriate outfit, and
even the appropriate sunglasses when she needs to drown
yeah, just like I don't think I need to
brother-in-law.
watch this, I'll put on my sunglasses while he goes under.
Golly.
Deeply, so yes, you that's the same message from the noir, which is that, you know, the Spider Woman is going to catch you. But I don't see the viewer of this movie as necessarily, you know, being the I think maybe you're onto something, that the male that's implied by this movie is already in this kind of post-war, I'm going to say, because it's straight out of feminist film theory, kind of castrated space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that there's no one who can handle her. You know, she even killed her father, who she loved more than, I mean, there's no explicit reference, but the movie, as you said, has her riding very vigorously on a horse, dumping his ashes in their own special place in New Mexico. So there's just, you know, there's something almost, like Greek god, you know, excess about her. So this is a little disconnected, but I'm saying that we're already hitting this place where there's anxiety in the male viewer watching film noir around what the femme fatale can do to him. I mean, it's there in his voiceover. He kind of can't make sense of, you know, the fate that to which he's, you know, been consigned. Here, there really isn't, I don't think, even a like, if you think about the structure of narration of the film, it's like, I'm really the only person who knows everything that you know went down with Ellen, and it's the, you know, avuncular friend of the family who is narrating the story to some other guy, where like there's no real validated, like you said, male character. Our hero is a writer. He's not, you know, he's not. So this one is just a hallucinatory film.
And the color really helps that, because it really just pops. It really explodes off the screen.
And they're weird colors, which Technicolor always would do, where you're like, why are you wearing that with that? And
it's really punchy. And
I said it already, but about the location. So we very deliberately go to like a dude ranch in New Mexico, and then we go to this back of
the
moon bay. We go to Bar Harbor, we go to Warm Springs, Georgia. This is part of this whole, like, let's encourage, you know, well, both the movies can take you places that you might not be able to afford to go, but also this kind of obsession with travel, and the capacity of post-war consumption, and sort of the continuum of entertainment options in the post-war period. Television, we're trying to keep away, because that is, you know, small scale and keeping you in your house. But there is this idea of more entertainment possibilities, and CinemaScope, you know, drive-in ready.
Right, absolutely. Let's shift to our next film, The Reckless Moment, 1949, directed by Max Ophuls. This film takes the domestic space and strips away almost everything else No murder mystery frame, no gothic excess, just a woman, a house, and everything she has to do to hold it together.
Mm.
Lucia Harper is a suburban housewife in California whose teenage daughter becomes entangled with a shady older man. When the man turns up dead, Lucia covers it up to protect her daughter and then finds herself being blackmailed. Her
Mhm.
husband is away on business. She has to handle it all on her own.
Mhm.
This is I don't know, is this the most precise portrait of domestic competence as entrapment? Like we
Mm.
have her like,
Well, yeah, good
yeah,
question. I think it's almost explicit in the
yeah,
movie. I mean, I would say there is this crime plot, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, and it's and leave it to the exceedingly charming blackmailer played by James Mason to tell her, you were a prisoner of your family. Can't you get away for one moment? So this is the mother who can't like go to town to try to get the blackmail money because people would think it was weird that she used the car twice in the same week. This is
yeah,
the woman who can't tell her husband anything because everyone crowds around the phone when he makes a call, and of course he's absent in a very, again, sort of a little bit referencing the war, but also kind of explicitly saying, that the paternal, power um, that the post-war period is really going to try to restore is highly in doubt. Like, yeah, he's a successful businessman, but he like she has to both, pick up the groceries and, like lift a whatever dead body into an outboard motor and drive it into a swamp and dispose of it, and just really hope she hasn't left her grocery list in the
yeah,
with the
right.
corpse. She's so relieved when she finds it in the pocket of her mink later. um so I love this movie. And I'll just do a shout out to Todd Haynes, who in his movie Far From Heaven, and we've already had Leave Her to Heaven, and we're
Yeah,
coming up on All That Heaven Allows.
yeah,
So he's thinking about this set of films. Really draws heavily on The Reckless Moment, as well as All That Heaven Allows, which is much better known. And incidentally, he also remade Mildred Pierce for HBO in a
right, yeah,
non-noir version, but that's also just as creepy in terms of the it's all Oedipal um, Oedipal issues,
yeah, right,
issues
right,
around sexuality within the family. So yeah, so this is about, can the mom have desire? And I feel like with The Reckless Moment, the reason, so I love it because Haynes loves it, and I think the reasons that we both love it are similar, is that it is about female fantasy. It is about, like, what if this horrible life that I have, that's perfect, I have beautiful children, I
right.
have,
Have
they live
everything,
in a,
yeah,
again, they live in a very cool place, and I'm really emphasizing that these films are about showing like new lifestyles. So this like little island near Los Angeles. Um, that what if this sexy Irish blackmailer came into my life and really recognized my true worth as a woman. So
yeah,
it's like this little idol that happens, and of course it ends badly all around. But the second reason being that this is told by Max Ophuls. So the noir elements of this film, yes, blackmail, crime, are in the cinematography.
yeah,
um there's a lot of location shooting, there's a lot of really incredible lighting, with that leads us to the this woman is a prisoner of domesticity, of her role of the middle class white woman who is sort of both idealized and shown to be, abjectly miserable. Like this, we have this overhead shot of her just sobbing on her bed, and then like having to like perk up to talk to her husband on the phone and, give him the banal details of their day. So the way the camera is handled, and Ophel's
well known for his camera.
yeah, especially for the mobile camera.
Yeah.
So the mobility of the camera in relationship to the entrapment of the heroine is extremely poignant, and just makes for, and it's just it plays so effectively. It really does. I was like, Leave Her to Heaven is like a hallucination, and this is like this kind of different kind of fever dream, just very compact, very like, did that really happen? It's all washed away. Like somehow the bodies of these men that die are kind of and
conveniently all fits into a puzzle for the police, so they can just check it off. Right,
goes away because she's not going to, she would be believed because she's this white woman, and then her kind of companion, who's the woman who her husband's gone, but she's a live-in black maid, Sybil, who like Butterfly McQueen, there are some cringeworthy moments of, she calls her, Mrs. I can't remember her name at the moment. But they like drive in a car together to kind of like catch the blackmailer. And you have this sense of, well, what if there were some kind of relationship between these women where they could kind of talk about like labor and possibilities and like what the hell's happening and changing in 1949 in the US. And it's just, you feel it, and you feel it from this. I was going to say, is this the first of our exile directors? And it isn't, because Cortese was also, but I feel with Ophuls you really get what people will argue is a kind of European take on the promise of post-war America, which is that it ain't all that promising for many.
No, and I think I want to go back to like just talking about the absent husband, because I think that's such a fascinating element of this story, because it really is this. In some ways, it kind of plays as this structural joke, right? Like she's like, that's part of the trap, right? She's enabled. Her competence is enabled because he's gone, but also everything that she does has to fit into the structure that he, and hence like society and everything, represents. And
let's call it patriarchy.
Yeah, right. She's managing all of this for somebody who's not even there. And I think that's a fascinating element of the story. And when James Mason kind of steps in loosely for that, it's like he, in some ways, she wants him to fit, but knows also that that's just not something that can actually happen. Especially, I mean, he's like this working class.
We don't know what his partner has on him that keeps him in that shady business.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why I think it's this kind of like, daydream kind of whatever of like, what if it wasn't, I hate to use again this theory term, but the paternal signifier, like it is, he's not, there is no real, husband, because he's not shown on screen. And that her desire should end, when she's a mother. And I mean, and Mildred Pierce is highly transactional. Like she does get to like first fall in love with her, with Monty, and that's sexual, but that quickly becomes her writing him checks or proposing marriage to him so that, she could have an aristocratic last name, like very, very transactional, so that the problem of women's sexual desire after marriage, and which Leave Her to Heaven is all about. Like she's always desirous. That the movie really does say the absence patriarchy is the determinative factor, and that again I think is reflected in the way the noir shadows in the house.
For
We've got
sure.
bars from the staircase, keeping her in prison. We have
Yeah.
doors that are being, shut on her, on, certain aspects of their life. Her own father lives in the house, and he's emasculated to a certain extent, and her son is always half dressed. So, there's something about his incomplete masculinity. And so, yeah, this idea that there is a masculine competence somewhere that could reflect Joan Bennett's is undermined everywhere you look, or killed off in the case of
Right.
Mason. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Foster Hirsch, who was my guest for the noir episode last month. He had grouped this film in a group of noirs that he says where ordinary women are suddenly invaded by crisis, and I think that's an interesting way to look at this, because it does this. These first three films that we're talking about really do tie in nicely with the melodrama and the noir, right?
Absolutely,
and I think we're getting a lot of that here.
We are.
All right, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Let's jump into The Bad and the Beautiful, 1952, directed by Vincente Minnelli. The domestic cycle doesn't only play out in houses and marriages. Sometimes it relocates its logic into another world entirely. And The Bad and the Beautiful does exactly that, taking the cycle's central dynamics of glamour, ambition, exploitation, and betrayal and running them through Hollywood itself. In this story, a powerful Hollywood producer, Jonathan Shields, has destroyed the career of three people who helped make him successful: a director, a writer, and an actress. The film unfolds in flashback as each tells their story of how Shields used them and what it cost them. It's an anti-Hollywood Hollywood film, and a deeply strange one. This it's a fascinating entry, and I'm really curious because in some ways you could say it feels the most displaced from everything that we're talking about. It's not a domestic space at all, but a professional one. Although power dynamics, you could say, are very similar still. And I'm curious, applying the emotional machinery of the post-war domestic melodrama to the film industry itself, how does that change things? What are we doing differently with this one?
Oh, yeah, interesting. I've spent some time thinking about the does it fit? How does it fit? In the ways that, it was interesting because you had proposed Letter to Three Wives, and I had I was just thinking of post-war fun movies, and I had said something about All About Eve, and they have these similar structures where there's like this kind of narration in which that it's kind of irony is explicit, whereas that's kind of hard with melodrama, right? Melodrama is kind of supposed to, it has dramatic irony all the time, I suppose, but it doesn't have like an irony of narration. So how could you tell a film about Hollywood that wasn't, in some ways ironic? But in the hands of Minnelli, I think you also have something that really brings the melodrama. And Minnelli's kind of entries into this cycle, and there's others, like Some Came Running, which, would have been a really nice, it's not really a domestic melodrama either, because, but it would have been nice because it has Shirley MacLaine in it, and there would have been a fun Shirley MacLaine thing going on with Children's Hour. What happens when you take it to Hollywood? So I guess what I would say, we were starting to get to it with what are the Europeans bringing to American domesticity. Here we have what does film's self-consciousness about itself bring to post-war American domesticity, if that makes sense. So like the distance of the frame, the Hollywood frame, allows us to then look at these ways of suffering of these characters that are determined by gender, mostly, class to a lesser extent, but somewhat there, in ways that are incredibly heartfelt. So like there's just something about Minnelli's films that are so like he's not taking distance from his characters in ways that like many of these other directors are. And that's just kind of weird because these characters are, they're you like you just said, there's a producer, the screenwriter, that they're very like iconic, and they're whatever, like genius boy, or they're made fun of for being like not like ordinary, but there's something super like emotionally resonant about it. So yeah, the film starts with a funeral that for a Hollywood mogul that Kirk Douglas character pays people to come to mourn, the death of old Hollywood. And he's trying to like, both fulfill a paternal legacy and rebel. So we've got the Oedipal themes again. And like, what is masculinity and what can masculinity be in this period? And even though this dude alienates deeply the three characters that I don't know if I fully spelt out the relationship to Letter to Three Wives and All About Eve, but that the idea that there's multiple nested flashbacks in which each person's take on what the hell's going down is focused on, right? Even though he's alienated all of these people, and several of them are men, it's actually got truer kind of feeling between the male characters than any other of the films that I could think of in our. I mean,
I think that's interesting because as I was thinking about it, I mean, obviously, I think the Lana Turner story as the actress who, I think that's, you can directly say, okay, I can see how that kind of relates to the domestic melodrama here. We've got this woman who is remade by this man who then discards her. And you could look at kind of the cost of ambition and all of that we've been talking about. But also when you look at films like, I'm thinking of Home from the Hill, where you're looking at a father-son relationship, or just a big character of a father and his relationship with his community and all of that. You can definitely see that a little bit within the story of Kirk Douglas's character, and likewise Written on the Wind, you have like this powerful son.
Yeah, it's a big man, and then he's playing by this
right. You're dealing with that between this father and this son, and you're seeing this in many ways a self-destructive character, like when Lana Turner comes over and finds the other woman at his place. Like there's a lot of similarity. And so I think all of that carries that emotional weight that we've been talking about. So it's a tricky one, but I do think there's a lot going on here that still makes it fit nicely into all of it.
It goes on any list of Hollywood films because it's because of its aboutness of Hollywood, and so I do think it that's there. I think you just did a really lovely job of talking about this. Again, these movies are not women's pictures. They are male melodramas. Like this one is where we switch, because the Lana Turner story is not the beating heart of the film. I mean, she has the most spectacular car crash it's just like
crazy drive.
I watch it sometimes just to be like, this is where I am right now. Like she comes out like without a scratch, but it's just like and so it's a film about the pathos of patriarchy, about how in this post-war period there's no way that any kind of masculinity is ever going to be, what it once was, or what the dream of like, America's benevolent, relationship to the world is going to be. So what are the most heartfelt ways that it's going to fuck up, right? And so and what better place to stage that than Hollywood, right? And it's I guess so this is post Sunset Boulevard. I'm trying to think of these self-reflexive Hollywood movies. I mean, I can't, the other, I have to we have to talk about Gloria Graham. So Gloria Graham, obviously she's in a lot of noir. She's, famously and troubledly married to Nicholas Ray for a time, who we haven't got to yet, but will. But she's a Southern belle. So and she as an actor, mind you, Lana Turner is perfectly cast in this movie as somebody who can't act and needs to be there's just something so great about it. And we have more to say about that too, in Imitation of Life. But Gloria Graham's performance here and her character, which is she's horny. She's horny for her professor husband, right? We've got another writer guy. I really feel her trappedness in her domestic space, and that she gets to take this trip to Hollywood and she is sacrificed for it, right? She can't, she's in the way of this kind of male bonding experience, which is like, let's make a movie. And so she has to be discarded, and she's literally is in a fatal plane crash, which is very melodrama, right? That is overkill, right? Killing over and above what the plot demands. And so that to me also makes it fit the what do you do with a desirous woman, and how does an audience feel with someone who has maybe an eighth of the film's screen time, but is just absolutely indelible.
And it speaks to why she got an Oscar for it, because she was so powerful in the small screen time that she had.
Yeah. So, any list you give me, I can put a Gloria Graham film on it.
Oh, yeah. We talked about In a Lonely Place in the film noir conversation last month. And it's just I'm like, anytime I can get Gloria Graham in any conversation, I'm thrilled.
That's exactly.
She's just one of my favorite people to watch and talk about.
Yeah. Great.
All right. We're going to move to All That Heaven Allows. This is a big one. 1955, Douglas Sirk. We've moved through the cycle's first decade, from the immediate post-war years into the early 50s. And now we hit the filmmaker who, more than anyone else, defined what this cycle looks like at its peak. Carrie Scott is a comfortable, widowed suburban woman who falls in love with Ron Kirby, her younger gardener. Her children disapprove. Her friends gossip. Her community makes clear that a relationship with someone of his social standing is unacceptable. The film is about whether she'll choose her own desire or the approval of everyone around her, and what either choice costs. This cycle's it's the most formally complete statement of this cycle, I think. Sirk using Technicolor, not as glamour, but really kind of as an argument. And I'm going to say Technicolor in a way you don't see often. I mean, it's just exploding off of the screen in every frame. And and it's so fascinating because you have beautiful surfaces everywhere, but they all feel suffocating. And you have this community as this entity that is really kind of like their gaze is the real antagonist of your story here. It's just, this is a powerful film with Sirk coding emotion into the image more than the dialogue, I'd even say. And I think that's such a fascinating element of Douglas Sirk throughout the films that he would make.
Yeah. And I heard coating, Coating, but I think it's that too. There's this coating over it, which is he's like, I used widescreen lenses and they made it seem hot. They make the surface seem hard and brittle, like they have a coating over them,
Yeah, right.
I'm just going to read a line from Tales of Sound and Fury, Observations on the Family Melodrama by Thomas Elsesser, 1972, which is the most kind of, the ur text of kind of thinking of this as a cycle.
Sure. Yeah.
he talks about the justification for giving critical importance to mise en scène over intellectual content or story value in these films. And then he says, it is also the reason, I don't know what the it refers to exactly, but back to your original question, what drama, that this is not a drama, this is a melodrama. Like speech doesn't matter. What people say does not matter, right?
Okay,
So
gotcha.
this is a justification for giving critical importance to mise en scène. It's also the reason why the domestic melodrama in color and widescreen, as it appeared in the 40s and 50s, is perhaps the most highly elaborated, complex mode of cinematic signification that the American cinema has ever produced, because of the restricted scope for external action determined by the subject, and because everything, as Douglas Sirk said, happens, quote unquote, inside. So I just wanted to get that quote in because, and actually I would give another quote about this film before we get into my response to the wonderful way you framed it. It is over here. I could probably get it, but it's Rainer Werner Fassbinder saying what he loves about Sirk's films. And he says, I love them because in Sirk's films, women think. You have the sense in All That Heaven Allows that Carrie, the Jane Wyman character, thinks.
Yeah.
And those two things kind of seem, well, I guess it's happening inside. So this, of all the films, probably has one of, I haven't totally researched it, but has one of the least literary, source material. Like it's a women's magazine story, right?
Oh, okay.
And and so there's the sense that these movies look like, and they look like women's magazines, that they tell stories that you might find in women's magazines, like, oh my God, my daughter was involved with this guy and then I got blackmailed and he was sexy, whatever. This one is, Rock Hudson is trimming my trees and for some reason wants to sweep me away from my absolutely impossible, perfectly upwardly mobile, college and post-college son and daughter to live in the pages of a women's magazine near Walden Pond, to have, whatever. Yeah. So, so what do we make of all of that? It is about the house, and about the house as trap, and about the way that I think you could also call this slightly noirish use of Technicolor, because there are a lot of very strong shadows in the film. And the color palette, like these like blues and yellows are, and then there's literally a stained glass window in the family home that casts a color wheel on the bed where somebody is sobbing, which is just like the scene in Reckless Moment where a woman is sobbing in the bed. And, there's some element of the house that distances you from like, oh, I want to copy that cool thing, and instead lets you feel like you've entered into this psychodrama that would be really hard to extricate yourself from. And that psychodrama is The Perfect American Family. So we have, again, absent husband, again, title that makes no sense, All That Heaven Allows. And you said the gaze of the
community's gaze,
the community's gaze, and specifically the club ladies and the so middle class, upwardly mobile, very country club, very status conscious, community is the antagonist. And when Fassbinder literally remakes this movie, as Ali, Fear Eats the Soul, it couldn't be more explicit. There's all these shots of just people like lined up staring at what in his film is a interage, interracial, like cross-generational and interracial couple. So a mismatched couple. And in Sirk's film, it's simply Rock Hudson, who could not stare at Rock Hudson, matched with Jane Wyman. And she's older than he is, but like not much. So they're not as scandalously, mismatched, but they're scandalously mismatched because she's not supposed to have desire. And then there's also the both retrospective, because we know that Rock Hudson was gay, but also I think perfectly possible at the time reading that Rock Hudson was gay or was not really in it for was in it for something else. Do you know what I mean? Like there's something about, again, his woodenness as an actor, his size, the way he's positioned in the frame and dressed and, made to seem almost like a representative of hunky masculinity and not really someone who's you're not getting inside his head particularly, right?
Well, and it's a fascinating glimpse into a type of person also. And I think like what you're saying is like he doesn't seem to care, like he doesn't care where he fits in. And he's, I mean, obviously we kind of meet, I don't want to call them bohemian, but it's just kind of like a group of carefree people who have no interest in making sure they fit in with the country club crowd, and that can just be free to enjoy themselves. And we meet somebody, the advertising friend, who had been in that circle and realized it was awful, and he left. And so it is a community that they've kind of created, but it's too different from the other community that she's already part of. And I think, Rock Hudson is an interesting casting choice to play that bridge, because in so many ways he doesn't seem like the sort who should fit. Right. But I mean, here he is. Like, I mean, it's interesting the way that he's written, because he's just like, I mean, he almost is like, the lover of the trees. Like he's this natural woodsman, but he seems almost too kind and caring to be like a real man in the country club sense.
Yeah, he's kind of a mom. Like he's always like tying her boots, or you don't want your feet to get cold. So there's ways in which his desire is not that, like there's like one of the country club men makes it like yucky pass at her, and then another country club man who's really old says we should get married not for the sex but for the companionship. And like
that's what everyone's pushing. That's okay.
Yeah. And in fact, this movie, spoilers, because it's a melodrama, doesn't really let them be happy, even though it lets them be together. So the sex really like maybe happens. There's one fade, but my guess is that, she goes from what her daughter, whom I kind of love because she's studying Freud, and talks about the Oedipus complex.
So great. So 50s.
With glasses on, and but which she has to take off to kiss.
Of course.
And to go back to the house, which is where this all started, the daughter is trying to explain, desire to some, frat boy outside their family home. And they finally kiss underneath their mother's window, and the mother shuts the window. And it's so this very dramatic sense of, as you said, she's imprisoned in the house. Her face is reflected in the piano. She's shot repeatedly through windows that are like lit in blue. So she's just, almost like taxidermied in there. And then most dramatically, after everyone tells her she shouldn't marry this younger man, she should just get a television. She has been persuaded to give him up and is trapped, reflected in the television. On our widescreen screen. So to say a gift from her children, as kind of a consolation prize for, well, you gave him up, so here's your TV. Your TV. and the TV never gets turned on. And in Fassbinder's film, the son kicks the TV, and then Todd Haynes's remake of this movie, which also includes Reckless Moment and Ali Fear Eats the Soul, the husband is a television executive, and they pose as Mr. and Mrs. Magnavox. So there's a lot of so let me try to turn rambling into a theme. Displacement. There's displaced desire all over the place in this movie, and it's the much has been made of the fact that yes, the couple does get together, and a beautiful doe who is represented, almost like that he is a pagan god, basically, Rock Hudson, and this doe follows him, is shown in their picture window, but he's injured, and she has to now take care of him. So the happy ending is not super happy. And that was something that Sirk insisted on, that irony being very, very visible to his viewers. So that displacement will always happen in his movies. I wanted to go back to something you said about the alternative community, because they do kind of start to appear in some of these films. So Minnelli's The Cobweb, it's actually set in a mental institution, but there's an art teacher, and they make, so there is a sense that there should be a counterculture. It's just, this is also stifling. There's a literary reference to, let me try to say it right, Thoreau, that's what you're supposed to say, and Walden Pond. I was at Walden Pond last week, so I was just reminded that we all mispronounced that name.
Interesting, yeah.
And the fact that Sirk is all the things that you mentioned about the color palette, the mise en scène that gets in the way. So he uses the same literal screen, like a decor screen. You see it both in Imitation of Life and in All That Heaven Allows. So it's let's pull it out, because I really like this idea of, people talking across furniture because they can't connect. Much is made of his literary background, theatrical background, his, intellectualness, so that he has an intellectual relationship to this material, and he is in effect critiquing Eisenhower American ideals. And I think this film pretty much holds up under that, argument. Even though it's based on a magazine story, and even though there's a big takeaway, which is what if Rock Hudson, were my gardener? That's trivial in women's pictury and all of that. So, to me, this is, maybe it's our middle film, but it's the one.
It's the big one, yeah.
Yeah, it's the big one that shows you what a woman's picture that's full on about her desire and the conflicts of her desire, how it looks different in the 50s than it would have in the 40s. And that is this kind of consumerist gloss and social hierarchy consciousness. And and
it's a fascinating glimpse into what we're going to see with Douglas Sirk, and we've got a few more to talk about. In fact, let's move on to our next one here. Written on the Wind from 1956. All That Heaven Allows showed us desire policed from the outside, the community as the force that says no. Written on the Wind takes the same Sirk palette and turns the destruction inward. Here, the family itself is the source of catastrophe. Kyle Hadley is the self-destructive heir to a Texas oil fortune who marries Lucy Moore, a woman he falls for almost impulsively. His childhood friend Mitch, who also loves Lucy, stands by helplessly while Kyle spirals into alcoholism, jealousy, and paranoia. Kyle's sister Mary Lee, wild, reckless, and desperately in love with Mitch, completes the four-person pressure cooker. When Kyle dies, the question of who's responsible for what tears everything apart. We're really kind of pushing what we had just been talking about with Sirk into an operatic excess here with the wealth and the family pathology, and it's all in beautiful Technicolor. This one is less about, I suppose, what's suppressed as to what can't be contained, right?
Yeah.
We're just kind of seeing just these things exploding and all in excess because again they're this wealthy Texas oil family.
Totally. Can you, I just am just checking one quick thing.
Yeah.
Does it mess up
No, yeah,
okay,
go
great.
ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, it's Texas wealthy oil family. Let's just say right out that, like, I mean, when I'm studying these films in the 80s for the first time, Dallas and Dynasty
Oh,
are going big time.
that's
Um,
exactly what I thought of when I was like, they had to pull from this directly. Yeah.
right. So, and from Home from the Hill, which is,
Yeah.
I
Right.
think less remembered.
Yeah.
So I think that Sirk had a quote about everybody loves that it's like this merry-go-round. And so to go back to that question of displacement, everybody's, like Marilee loves
She loves Mitch.
Mitch
Yeah.
loves Lauren
Lucy. Yeah.
Bacall.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Lauren Bacall loves Kyle White. Well, he is really
Presumably.
good. Like, Robert Stack is
Yeah.
so good in this movie. Um,
I just have to say it's hard for me to watch Robert Stack in anything because all I picture is the crime show. Like
yeah, the late life Robert Stack, but the voice
yeah. Oh.
and like I think Alcester says something like the voice that sounds like it's pumped out from one of those oil wells, right?
Oh.
So
Yeah. Great. Yeah.
yeah. So this one, so I do think you get like, yes, you get this completely like you said, operatic, I think very explicit critique of American consumerism and wealth. And you get, again, you get Rock Hudson as representing this sort of nature man alternative where there is, some sense that he's, where the values, true values lie. But then again, he's going to, go, whatever. He sticks with this family. He's going to go for oil in Iran. Like, he's not outside either. I think that the Written on the Wind, the pace, the cutting, the motion, the color, the what does he call them? The split characters, the rich kids, Robert Stack and Dorothy Malone's characters, Kyle and Marilee, the siblings, are so memorable that, I do not teach, I hope, a cohort of college students without at least making them watch Written on the Wind. And they're not hard to persuade that, that as cornball as it is, that there's just something, akin to that quote that in Sirk's films, that there's just this complexity going on. So Sirk confesses his interest in those split characters who can't get what they want. It's not that he identifies with the rich ones, but the ones who are just eaten inside by some, inability to, whatever, fulfill their desires. So Kyle is an alcoholic, Marilee's a nymphomaniac, both make for great, symbolic use of props and costumes. So you have, the movie starts with Kyle in his what his sister calls his kitty car, this bright yellow sports car, and drinking and a gun and a shooting, and then the movie's a sort of flashback, and it has a really good courtroom scene. Like it's much more efficient than the courtroom scene in Leave Her to Heaven. Right. And Marilee, like, okay, we get to talk about both Dorothy Malone and Gloria Graham. So thank you for inviting me to. So Dorothy Malone is so amazing in this movie. The way she holds herself. And I was talking about props. She wears this red dress. Red is her color. She has a red sports car. And she has red flowers in her room. And at a certain point, she is so like frustrated by her inability to, get Rock Hudson's attention. And again, Rock Hudson reads, again, it's not particularly heterosexual,
Right.
there's little moment where he puts his hand on like the guy that she's trying to seduce, and you're like, that's where the action is. Um, she decides she needs to put on a mambo record in her room and undress and whirl around after she's been busted, brought home by the cops for trying to like pick up guys, and like falls back in a frenzy and is kicking her feet in this chair. And there's this very long lap dissolve as her father has been kind of coming up the stairs, kind of a beaten and broken man, falls down the stairs, and the lap dissolve makes it look like she's just like kicking this man at the bottom of the steps. Like, it's seriously using like displacement in like almost like a Freudian sense, where something is in a dream, where something is getting the meaning of something is elsewhere, but there's something very like you can't look away from that's happening in front of you.
The way that Sirk uses dissolves in all of these films is masterful, because there's a lot of interesting imagery that are combined with each other.
It's almost abstract. And again, the core is almost abstract. It what I was looking at before is just to make sure, just to say a bit about the team. So, I said like Sirk, like he worked, like whatever, he was in experimental theater, in very trained in Germany before he comes to the US. He's Brechtian, and like Brechtian, wow, like that's not something you associate with the melodrama, where you're supposed to be over invested, and Brechtian is distanced, right? You have the oh, these are actors being actors, and he really is, that's played up. But he gets to Hollywood, and he gets like this producer Ross Hunter, cinematographer Russell Meddy, and Universal's just like, here, go make this cycle of films, and he throws it all in them, right? And he's like, okay, you want me to use all this money for pink and purple walls in this fake Miami hotel, or recreate 21. Let's do it, but let's make every one of those objects like feel like they have this psychic weight for these characters. Like at the hotel, Lauren Bacall, who we see as like an ad. Well, I guess she maybe is the secretary, but she could be Peggy in Mad Men quite, plausibly. Sure. She could have risen to executive. She is Lauren Bacall. She just gets her head turned by Kyle Hadley, and, flies off to Miami with him, and then like turns away from this pink and purple, completely outfitted hotel room with like, it has a million gowns and purses and wraps and jewels in it. And she's like, I think it's beautiful, but I think of how ugly it would be in the morning, So there's some explicit acknowledgement of objects as carrying moral weight, but there's also, but it's happening everywhere in the movie. Like, like, again, like I mentioned very briefly that Dad's a big man. I know I can't fill his shoes. And then Dad is cast by a very short actor. So again, that it's like we're in the realm of, is patriarchy, a viable, structure, or is it toppling? And then to be even more explicit about sort of patriarchy and phallic imagery, we have Marilee, who at the end is seen caressing an oil derrick in front of a portrait of her father with, like a desktop oil derrick.
Desktop, right,
in front of a portrait of her father with the oil derrick in the frame. So there's this like, oh, the woman is the one who should carry it on, but what is she going to bring to it? There's something sexualized in her gesture, and there's something very, to my mind, satisfying, because indeed she is the most, as you said, of Gene Tierney's character in, Leave Her to Heaven, the
Yeah.
most alive part of this movie.
Well, she for me was kind of the most fascinating figure in the whole movie, because there was just the way that the film has her character play out, the treatment, I guess you could say the ultimate treatment of her, with her decision that she makes in the courtroom, and then ending up in the powerful position of actually inheriting dad's oil empire. And
Yeah.
that final moment was like, that's the last phallus that she's going to get to stroke.
Yeah.
She's never going to be with Mitch.
Yeah.
But here she is, this powerful woman now. And it's like, I don't know, it was a fascinating glimpse into the woman inheriting this patriarchal empire, and in a way kind of becoming the male figure.
Yeah, and which I think you can read in again in an ironic way, like if he's saying that these happy, I mean, obviously he would say this was not a happy ending because she lost Mitch, but I don't think Mitch was putting it out anyway. So to me, that's where we go straight to, well, I don't know, Molly Haskell also had this distinction in the women's pictures between the super women and the super females, and the super women who could, do the masculine stuff, and the super females who were, manipulative bitches and got it all done anyway. And I think she's a super woman, but definitely in Dynasty, is the destiny for the super female version of Marilee's character, where she would be able to run it all with feminine wiles. We don't know. That's the beauty of the night of a feature film. It ends right there.
Yeah. I was just thinking, it's so fascinating because now we have Demi Moore essentially doing the same thing in Landman, right? It's just like this thread of that type of story that people are clearly drawn to.
Was that your first time seeing Written on the Wind?
Yes. Yeah.
Yay. So I'll claim that with all the undergraduates, with the decades of undergraduates. All right.
No, it was fantastic.
Okay.
Let's move to Bigger Than Life, 1956, the second 1956 film, this one directed by Nicholas Ray. The cycle has largely centered on women navigating a world that constrains them. This next film really turns that inside out, putting the husband and father at the center and watching him become the source of danger inside the home that he is supposed to protect. Here we have Ed Avery, a mild-mannered schoolteacher in suburban America who's diagnosed with a painful arterial disease and prescribed cortisone, a then-new miracle drug. The drug works, but at high doses it begins to transform him. He becomes grandiose, tyrannical, and eventually delusional, convinced he's been chosen by God to purify his family. His wife and son are trapped in the house with a man they no longer recognize. This is an inversion of the cycle we've been talking about, and it's possibly the most disturbing one that we're looking at, where the home becomes a site of danger and not a source of refuge, and normalcy itself as kind of this mask that we're wearing that kind of falls off. And in an interesting way, a post-war, or appointed, like it's a critique of the post-war masculine authority. And in some ways, like there was one moment that stood out to me as like, man, there are some elements here that are frighteningly connected to modern day. And it's when he goes on his rant at the PTA meeting, and there's one dad afterward who is just like,
MAGA dad.
This is the guy. Yeah. I was like, this is the guy we should all be listening to. And it was like, wow, they were back then too. Crazy. Yeah.
No, I had the same reaction. I was like, oh my God,
Yeah.
Wow. No, yeah. So first, I guess I would say, what could you say after All That Heaven Allows? And so, I mean, I'm sorry, Written on the Wind. Is there any movie you can talk about after Written on the Wind? And I think it is probably Bigger Than Life, because it true is, just like, again, a masterpiece, I think, of this genre. And then when you said the home itself is threatened, I just wanted to connect the staircases. So,
Yeah,
because
for
I just
sure.
talked about the dad being kind of kicked but falling down the stairs and dying. That is how he dies, just out of weariness and inability to control his nympho daughter and alcoholic son, and not have the son he wants, which is
It's
Rock
Mitch.
Hudson.
Yeah.
Everyone wants
Everyone
Rock
wants,
Hudson, and
yeah.
he is fully absent of all desire. Um, and that's like this incredible, winding staircase with a red, carpet, whatever.
Oh, it's
But in
beautiful.
Bigger
Yeah.
Than Life, it's, they live in a tract house. They're in they're in the Levittown, and things become very, very dark in this house. And the kind of climax of the film is Walter Matthau, who's the gym teacher at the school where James Mason is the bow-tied, old-fashioned Mr. Chips guy, comes to like rescue the family, and they tussle on the stairs, and they break through the banister and fall down. And so Elsesser again, I think, talks about the staircases and the kind of rhythms of melodrama being super compressed, like the highs and the lows, the coincidence, and that's why the story, which was like a New Yorker story about somebody who
Actually had something like this
had
happen.
something
Yeah.
or other. Yeah. They become very compressed in the storytelling form of Hollywood film, and that the staircase is the perfect emblem for it, because like people are like, not only the spaces of the house. So Jane Wyman is a prisoner up in her bedroom, uh, the Reckless Moment mom is a prisoner up in her bedroom upstairs. And then these staircases are places where, people are having dramatic encounters, or like just the whole thing falls apart. So, I think that Bigger Than Life is this is the first one we've talked about with Nicholas Ray, but I think I mentioned him before. So, he's coming off of doing Rebel Without a Cause, which easily could be on this list, but it's just better known because it's the juvenile delinquent film.
Right.
But the reasons
Certainly
why
have the emasculated dad in that film for sure. Yeah.
Where's the Apron?
Yep.
And the homes of two of the three, kids, are you could be straight out of this genre, like what's happening, in so Ray's interested in these themes, but he's also like, bigger than life. Like he's making this kind of small story into this extremely like cosmic, the delusion that he gets is a biblical one, that, he has to sacrifice his son, as did Abraham. but his wife's like, he didn't actually go through with it.
Yeah.
But James Mason, our charming blackmailer, and who produced the film, which I thought was interesting, is terrifying. I mean, and it has to do again with a very powerful voice. That his performance is really, I mean, he's able to go from like, I am this, bow tie wearing, to work, and then I put on a cardigan and have a second job.
Very Mr. Rogers, yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Rogers, exactly. Second job dispatching taxis, because this middle class lifestyle is completely unaffordable. We cannot do it. We can't buy the appliances we need. We can't go to the places that are represented on the posters, on our walls in our little house, like they have, Venice.
All the Roman things everywhere, or the different things from Italy.
They want to go. So I think the crisis of the patriarch shown this explicitly also supports this, perhaps exaggerated, but I kind of with it argument that these films are, while ostensibly, melodramas, um, are critiques of
Yeah.
American culture.
Well, I absolutely think that, and I think that's what's so fascinating because I mean, in many ways, and sure, we have this whole medical issue that he has, but I think a lot of it is also the cortisone really kind of becomes a metaphor because I don't think, in some ways, that Ed is just suddenly becoming this authoritarian figure. I
Yeah,
think in some ways you're seeing like there, especially in that PTA scene and some of the things he's saying, I think a lot of it is probably already there.
yeah,
And this is just a tool that's amplifying it. And I think that's absolutely a critique of perhaps in some ways the way that the decade was overrun with wounded and depleted men who were striving to become a bigger representation of what a man is supposed to be.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I thought I'm thinking here of Best Years of Our Lives, which
Mm.
it it's such an important movie where we probably shouldn't call it a domestic melodrama, but whoa, it's like three separate ones. But
Yeah.
in that movie, the most high flying of but also lowest class of the three servicemen who come back from the war and find it hard. Um, it played by Dana Andrews has this incredible scene where he like goes back into like a junked fighter plane and realizes like it's junked and like the front of it's cut off, so it's
Yeah.
like completely like ugh. And then he's kind of saved by the fact that he hears that all of the junked planes are each going to be turned into post-war housing. And so like so I'm even thinking of these little homes as like, oh my god, this like version of masculinity that was called upon during the war, and has now become the organization man, has become the madman, ad man, whatever, is they're now firmly in their little houses and they're like they're going crazy, and what are the political consequences of that going to be?
Yeah.
And Nick Ray is a very outspoken leftist, and I think that that's pretty clear that bigger than life is probably grandiosity, and
Yeah.
that there is a national allegory there.
How do you read the ending where, Ed is subdued, he's kind of weaned from his drugs and everything, and the family's back together, but then the doctor's like, oh, he'll still have to take the drugs.
Right.
It's just now you're going to be managing it better.
Yeah.
Do you think, is there a happy ending that we have
Here's
here?
what I get there, and it is stolen, but also by Fassbinder, which I didn't even really realize till rewatching the movie. But he's like, "Oh yes, I recognize you're my son and you're my wife. This was important." There's this like red alarm light outside the clinic where he's recovering from his psychosis, and they're allowed to go into the psychosis recovery room, and they crawl in the hospital bed with him. So even though like on the level of like, so yes, he is still taking the drug, but the fact that the nuclear family is now like consigned to a hospital bed, that's where I read the ending of that movie.
Yeah. All right.
I think we need
There's a
some
pervasive
social
illness.
organization. I think
Yeah.
we need some, maybe we need some, labor unions. I think we need some, I think we've seen more than this domestic space.
Yeah. Right. Right. All right. We're going to take one more break and we'll be right back. Let's talk about going back to Douglas Sirk, Imitation of Life, 1959. This is Sirk's farewell to Hollywood, and he knew it because afterward he retired to Switzerland, having recognized that the visual system he developed for melodrama throughout the decade was complete, I guess you could say. This is, in some ways, the cycle's most socially exposed film, and certainly it could be seen as its most devastating. Laura
Mm.
Meredith is an ambitious white actress who takes in Annie Johnson, a black woman, as her live-in housekeeper. The two women and their daughters, Laura's daughter Susie and Annie's light-skinned daughter Sarah Jane, who is desperate to pass as white, build a life together over many years. The film runs two intersecting maternal melodramas simultaneously, and by the end has exposed every comfortable assumption the cycle is built around motherhood, sacrifice, and the American dream. Yeah, we've got a race story, labor issues. We've got the struggle of trying to pass as somebody else, maternal sacrifice, and I mean, there's, I mean, I don't know, two mothers, two daughters, two different stories. This parallelism that's going on through this whole thing, kind of exposing a lot of stuff that these other, we'll just say, white maternal melodramas were leaving out. And I thought that was interesting. I mean, and we should say, certainly through today's eyes, there are a lot of other ways that we can be reading things that are going on with this story, kind of like the mammy sort of caricature that we have in here. And there was a whole article I read, or I found. I couldn't access it because it's behind firewall or paywalls, but it's like, what is wrong with Sarah Jane, and a lot of those sorts of stories. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, but at the core of it, I think it really is this story about these characters, and it's a powerful one.
Oh, powerful, powerful. And before we said like, oh, let's just let's end our cycle with that funeral, but we could also sort of end Hollywood a little bit. I mean, end the story about Hollywood with the success of this movie. I mean, it was an enormous blockbuster. Like, it was really popular and it was really remembered, and it is a women's picture. I mean, we've got 4 women in it. Like, we've got like John Gavin in and out of the movie. But this one's for the female audience, and it's a remake of a 1934 film, and it's an adaptation of a Fannie Hurst novel. So we have like full on women's picture credentials. And I think that I don't want to defer to, I don't think that Sirk was like very deeply able in 1959 to comment on the depth of what was happening in the civil rights movement in the US. But I do want to point out that he himself said that they had to like make her more mammy-ish because it would be so unrealistic in the 1950s for her to stay on in this house because of all the things that had happened in the US. So to remake this 30s Depression era material in which the women in that movie are more clearly employer and employee, and also more clearly there's a more extractive relationship between between Laura, between the characters' names are different but between the white mom and the black mom, because the black mom has a pancake recipe, and so she becomes a trademark for a pancake business, and the white woman becomes a pancake entrepreneur. That's in the Hearst novel, and that's in the and just to get another amazing name in there, but Zora Neale Hurston was Hearst's secretary when she was writing that novel. So there was some actual like struggles around how to make sense of race and extractiveness and literal stereotyping in terms of product placement in the 30s version that was removed for the 50s version and made just more into like some weird pink fantasy life that they live, in order to make color matter. So the colors of the film, the pink, but also to make the race matter, but in a very Sirk way, where you're asking, what does it mean? What are people not seeing in these relationships? So I'm kind of making an argument for the film is absolutely about the possibilities of Black women and white women, and their, where they could go or be, but it's firmly centered on the white women. But it's asking you what it can't see and what we can't see. So
Yeah.
so if that makes sense. So I do want to say, yes, that it's enormously emotionally affecting, both on the level of, and that has nothing to do with the white women, on the level of Sarah Jane's conflict around racial passing, which again is from a long-standing motif and important in Black authored literature and film, as well as in a few important Hollywood films, like, yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
And so Sarah Jane's like conflict, and she's played by Susan Kohner, who is who is white.
Well, and
I mean,
Mexican
her mom's
American. Yeah.
She has Mexican and Jewish ancestry.
Yeah.
But not Black.
Right.
And then Juanita Moore characters, Annie's character, the Black mom, her death. And so why does she have to die? That's a good question. I mean, she has to die because that stereotype has to die, but also because that's the maternal mellow. She dies for her daughter. So she removes her Black body from the world so that her daughter can like become part of Lana Turner's family. Like, it's like, so, yeah. But the pathos of those scenes, however, it's not even because there are multiple scenes, the pathos of those arcs is so affecting, despite the absolutely surrealness of the overpacked mise en scène, because Lana Turner's characters, Laura Meredith, is rich, so you have to, and she's tacky, so you have to have like just stuff everywhere in this film that is distracting you from the realism of these emotions. So to back up, how do we know that the film is kind of taking distance from its presentation, but also allowing you to feel the real conflicts? Well, we know because in the opening title sequence, we have like weird diamonds falling into the frame, and somebody who's not King Cole, not Nat King Cole, Earl Williams, is singing this theme song, and the film is called Imitation of Life. And like, what does that even mean? I mean, any Hollywood film could just be like, have shooting script, Imitation of Life. Any Hollywood film could be called that. So it tells you from the beginning. And then they go to Coney Island, which has a lot of, great real history, but clearly in this film is standing in for like, well, it actually is standing in for leisure culture and racial mixing, possibility of leisure culture and racial mixing, but it is standing in for leisure culture as escapism, and the movies as escapism. And is this movie's imitation of life? Like, when does it actually land on life? And it lands on life, I would say, in these feelings that are just so intense. And these performances, like Susan Kohner is so good as Sarah Jane. And then Sandra Dee is so perfect as Susie. And Lana Turner, so perfect as an actress who, when she tries to play a socially relevant part, is like unconvincing. So the movie works, I guess, on layers and levels and displacements. And again, so with as part of the Sirk trilogy, it's I think best proves you have to hold together the women's picture audience, the truth of emotion, and the pathos of women's centrality and yet powerlessness, and take it seriously and not trivialize, and the truth of Sirk's Brechtian influenced, every frame, every camera height is always a weird thing with him. Like, he uses the camera like on the floor a lot. Like, there's just these weird ways in which, or low at least, where you're like, you're seeing elements of decor, and you're seeing characters as elements of decor, and you're
Like
seeing
through the arm of a chair or things like that.
that's
Yeah.
right. You're
Yeah.
seeing this sort of checkerboard effect
Yeah.
of um or I guess chess where
Yeah.
the pieces are being moved by hands that are greater than ours. Are those hands American racism? Are they Hollywood's fatuousness? Are they both at the same time? I think this movie holds them together the best.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, and it really gives the characters, these four actresses, the chance to really kind of play a lot within the well, we'll say the frame, the actual physical frame that Sirk is using, but
Which
also
is
just
wide.
yeah, which is wide, but also
Yeah.
like the frame of their characters and what they're representing. And I think for me, I don't know, that it's hard to not look at that motel room scene where Sarah Jane is living at the end, and Annie comes to visit her, and was, like kind of knowing like this is probably the last time I'll see her because of the way that she reacts, and just like that final goodbye and everything, and then her friends show up, and just the way that she has to depart. I mean, it really kind of rips your heart out.
It's dry eyes.
Ugh, that's a tough one. That's
Yeah,
a tough one.
I
Yeah.
cannot. I always cry. Like you could say, basically, you say the word Stella Dallas and I cry. And Imitation of Life, I have to, because that's the words. I
Yeah.
don't cry unless I watch. But that scene, and let's just say, because we mentioned Sirk's use of mirrors and screens already, but she does look in a mirror and she says the girl in that mirror is white, which gets in all this meta stuff about casting or whatever. And so she's faking with the friends, and then she says goodbye to her mother, and just under her voice says to us.
Yeah.
She says it to us. And so you can, and then the funeral scene, I can't get, I mean, the funeral scene is ridiculous. This is this woman who has been self-effacing her whole life, Annie, and she's like, but I'm going to have a funeral that's going to have like, basically you're going to have to call in the prop department and get everything that's left over from like Gone with the Wind, like all the horses and carriages and whatever. And it's shot through there's one shot through like a basement shop that says costumes through it. So there's every opportunity to not cry, and yet you cry because this woman who's so self-effacing is, and she wanted this funeral, she wanted this spectacle, she wanted this Black woman's funeral to take over Fifth Avenue.
And just also a great nod, like a callback to when Laura, who's so oblivious, was just like, oh, I didn't know you had any friends. Oh my God. Wow. So, and then to see like the street just full of people, I'm just like, okay, that was a payoff that was worth it.
Yeah. And to see Black people who are not being asked to, to allow them to be extras, because that is really what all Hollywood could imagine at that moment. I mean, not to say there aren't some other, that's another podcast.
Yeah, right. A whole other thing. All right, let's move on to Home from the Hill, 1960, directed by Vincente Minnelli. The cycle is kind of moved through maternal sacrifice, suburban containment, family pathology, and the racial fault lines underneath the American dream. This next film stays in the domestic space, but moves the center of gravity from the women navigating the system to the man who built it.
Oof.
Wade Honeycutt is a wealthy, philandering Southern patriarch whose iron grip on his family is the organizing force of the entire community around him. His legitimate son, Theron, is raised under his thumb, trained to be a man in his image. Rafe, his illegitimate son, is kept at the margins, acknowledged informally but denied everything formal. When both young men fall for the same woman, and when the weight of Wade's history starts to collapse, the film reveals how thoroughly one man's myth of masculinity has poisoned everyone around him. I mean, Robert Mitchum, I've always loved. We talked about him a lot in the film noir, but watching him in this film, I'm like, this is a great next step for him to kind of continue and move into this space. I mean, wow.
Like to open the door to the den and all of a sudden it's in color, because all those noir movies, he's so fierce and scary, and he's still fierce and scary, but like let's just talk about the den. We know this is the den. So he has this bastion of masculinity, which is like, deep blood red accents, and Minnelli does red like no one does red. And I'm thinking across his musicals and his melodramas here.
Sure, yeah.
And a rack of guns on the walls, like boars' heads. I mean, wild boars in a yellow swamp are like part of the mise en scène of this movie. Like, this movie is really, I mean, we just keep topping over the topping.
Yeah, right.
Just these taxiderming heads. So he has this manly den, and then we were talking about how the father in the other Southern melodrama. Oh, and this one. No, I forgot to say that Written on the Wind, there is actually a crime. There is like a whole like Southern crime, like a tobacco farmer crime, real life story behind that was, which was interesting to find out. After years of teaching it, I kind of delved a little bit more into it. This one, he's so, it's the opposite, right? He is the big man. Like, we finally meet the man that was missing from all the other films. Like, the dad is dead, he's ashes, and leave her to heaven. He's at the other end of the phone line. We're not really entirely sure he exists, but in Reckless Moment, Bigger Than Life, the contrast is clear, but this is like an actual big man.
Yeah, he's right. Like in Written on the Wind, he's a small man.
Yeah, and Written on the Wind, he's a small man. And this guy's a big man like Rock Hudson, but he's an actor. And not a model. I mean, not that I do love Rock Hudson I think he's got great comic timing, and I'm not to say, but I think he's directed. I think both Lana Turner, this isn't my aside, and Rock Hudson are directed to be wooden in the Sirk movies. Yeah. And I think that's good. Yeah. Anyway, so here we see him. And I think the tragedy is with the son. The tragedy is with the son who's being forced, who's played by George Hamilton, Theron, who's clearly, he is a mama's boy. I mean, she makes him warm milk like how many times in that movie? Mom withholds sex from her husband. He finds it elsewhere. I think that it's not gay, but it's kind of gay. Like, I mean, I do think the Theron and his relationship with his half brother, the bastard son, George Peppard, who, really does want to acknowledge his kinship, but is not as anxious about. Anyway, he wants to acknowledge kinship. There's a thing going on around possible forms of masculinity that could be possibly emerging around 1960, that could be queer, and that just Robert Mitchum is around to make sure that does not happen. And so in the movie, it's, the George Hamilton character does have to have a sexual initiation, but like he's always wearing like these white jean outfits that, I don't know, he's just cute in this way that is very like not, it is another form of masculinity, and he's being and so the pathos is about could that emerge?
Well, and it's an interesting glimpse into the world of the family at this time, especially through these post-war domestic melodramas, where in many ways we've been focused on the mother, and here the mother has specifically cut a deal, we'll just say, essentially with Wade to say, I will stay with you because you're going to give me control to raise our son. Now, first of all, how do you even get to that place where you need to make that decision? Like already this well of this relationship has been poisoned, right? Wade is already a toxic, just
Yeah.
pollutant in everything that he touches, and we're seeing it right here, which had to have been before they even had the kid, right?
Yeah.
And then, like, through all of this, like, and she's poisoned, so she's pushing their son to be raised a certain way, and all of that shifts at this point when we come into the film, when he's recognizing that, people look at me wrong, and why have you not trained me to be the hunter that you are? I'm
Yeah.
your son, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden everything starts changing, and I just think, like, that's when the poisoning really starts shifting from poisoning the wife to poisoning the son, and turning him into another monstrous version, of what he had been.
Yeah, no, I think that's really right. And so that we've got to this point of the family's completely disintegrated.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's
Oh,
like
totally.
they're not even pretending to lie in the same hospital bed together. Like they all have separate rooms. I mean,
Yeah.
and again, leave it to Minnelli to have like really separate rooms, like the decor that matches each character's, whatever gestalt is so perfect. And over the top.
And
Um,
they're really, like, when they go to someone else's space, like they come into the doorway, and the other
yeah,
person is, like, at the far end, like it's a
yeah,
long hallway to get to
yeah,
that space. Like, they really separate the spaces here.
yeah. I mean, and so I would say, yeah, for Minnelli, like I've talked about color and mise en scène, but we really do want to talk about like, yeah, his use of space and his use of mobile camera is really, I think, important, because he's making he's like we started out talking about these arguments, about characterization, but also about like the possibilities of repair, through you know camera distance and yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I was thinking a little bit about Giant,
Oh,
which you
yeah.
kind of can't not think about, I suppose. And if you're thinking about like Home from the Hill and Written on the Wind, I mean, Written on the Wind is just so tight, um, but this one sprawls a little bit, in that kind of
Definitely more epic. I mean, close to,
yeah,
it was like 2.5, 3 hours, somewhere in there.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and doesn't need to be, except for it. I mean, in the sense that it's still very focused on this kind of small family,
Yeah.
kind of allegory. Um, yeah, I guess the mom I want to say a little bit more about. I love Eleanor Parker. She's
Yeah,
so
yeah.
weird. Her performance is so weird in this film, in a kind of great way. Like she looks like she's on Valium. I mean,
Yeah,
she's
right. Interesting.
doing this kind of drawl, that's very kind of otherworldly. She's enacting these kind of, post-war, like, I mean, God, we've already had the feminine mystique is written the year before. So yeah, so we're really
Hmm.
seeing this kind of, she gets her moments of explosive like desire, but her desire is for her son, which is
Yeah,
misdirected. Uh,
yeah,
but I do feel for her. And then we have the sexy women who are, the lusty women
yeah.
who are, probably, I think, representing a little bit of, the cusp of, sexual revolution happening, because it's coming in a way more from them than from Theron. Um, yeah,
Right. Like, and I think Libby is a good representation of that for the young men, right? Right.
yeah,
She also feels very, um, just to kind of like go back to like the Disney side of her, like she's very fun and fancy free.
yeah,
That's kind of like the world that she comes from, just very light, and I think that plays well into this era and these stories, and feels very different from Eleanor.
hmm
Well, and using her, I think I just want to get a sense from you, because Rafe, we haven't really talked too much about
yeah,
Rafe, but such an important character in the story, and
yeah.
George Peppard, I thought, was
He's
fantastic.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, and really the most sympathetic character in the whole film. And I'm curious, like, how do you read his position in the film? Is our sympathy like a critique of the legitimacy, or is it like ultimately kind of reinforcing all of the questions that we have about about him and his relationship with his dad
Yeah.
and Eleanor.
Yeah. Um, I think we're with him. And I think
Yeah.
that we're with him in kind of, we were talking about a little bit in the other Minnelli film with Bad and the Beautiful, which is that there's this way in which his sensitive men, and this isn't the sensitive son per se, but he really is, that they have a kind of emotional truth to them. I mean, I feel like the struggle, I don't know. Yeah, I think Rafe is. I mean, what a name, right?
Yeah.
Rafe and
Rafe
Wade
and Theron. Yeah.
and
Like,
Theron. It's like you're not
yeah.
telling us anything here. Yeah. No, I think the film is happy with him being illegitimate. Like, what is legitimacy? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that
Well,
what you're
and
asking? Yeah.
yeah, right, exactly. And I think that's interesting, especially with the ending that we get with the with him
At
now taking on the father role for his brother's child, and the grave and everything. Like, it feels like it's trying to find a way to make it legitimized, And I think that's interesting.
Yeah, and that she's so, which I guess we should think of as a shift. I think we should think of it not as a reinscription of like, oh, let's just pretend. Yes, it is an acknowledgement, and he gets to be part of the he gets to be seen by her and as real. But I think what we are seeing is an acknowledgement of a generational shift to a new kind, and that dad moves into this appropriately ridiculous gravestone, which I guess I'll just call back to, there's this really hilarious moment in Written on the Wind where the son, All That Heaven Allows, where the son, who's like a total cad, who's only good for making martinis, and criticizing his mother, it refers to some like thing that's on the mantle that basically represents dad, right?
The big
And that,
trophy,
like, trophy that that they drink from or something, and that he says, this, we can't get rid of that. Why'd you put that away? It's been in the family, I don't know how long. So it just kind of says, like, why do we invest in these traditions? So I think Home from the Hill has this kind of fun way in ending with this, like, we're investing in this ridiculous thing because we've been able to turn his patriarchal vitriol into a thing, one that's perfectly big on screen, and Minnelli knows, Minnelli knows how to do that, but that we are going to understand generational legacy and what masculinity could be. And I guess I'm thinking of Tea and Sympathies coming. I'm not sure sequencing when it comes in.
We're not talking about that one. We've got
no, but I'm just thinking about where we're getting there. But just when it's made, you could, that there, that there's much more explicit ways of talking about other forms of masculinity. And I guess it's a little reinscribing the nuclear family at the end, but it is, and whatever, what Giant does it too. It's like, let's have these Mexican kids as part of our family. I mean, they try to put it all back in the family. I guess that's something I could say and haven't said. Melodrama takes everything that's political and puts it in the family, right? That's both good because there's politics in the family and we all know that and we don't say it enough. It's also bad because the way it looks in the family is not like legible as politics, and you can't put it all there.
Yeah, right.
Especially not just white families. Yeah.
That's actually an interesting way of looking at a lot of these films. I can see that through a number of them, so.
Yeah. Like the conflicts are intractable because they are in the world out there. And these relationships they're all symbolizing them. Yeah.
Which speaks to the internal way that, like, I mean, inside the house, the internal feelings, all of that kind of like ties into the whole idea of the domestic melodrama. Well, let's end our conversation, we're going to be looking at The Children's Hour, 1961, directed by William Wyler. Everything we've really traced through the cycle with the production code and its pressure on desire, the way communities police what can and can't be said, arrives at its most explicit point here, where the code really is kind of breaking open. Here we have two women running a small private school together, and a malicious student spreads a rumor that they are lovers. The rumor destroys everything: the school, their reputations, their relationships, regardless of whether or not it is true. We've already kind of mentioned this is really kind of closer to the social problem film, which, as you've said, is also, it's not starting here. It's also had its long thread throughout the this period. But I'm curious, like, looking at this film and trying to say, okay, how can we look at this through kind of this post-war domestic melodrama lens? How do you see what this story is trying to say, and this internal story of these two women? Which, I mean, we'll just say this school may as well be their home.
Right. And it is. I mean, you get little spaces like, well, my room's, it's very important that my room doesn't have a keyhole. So these kids are lying, you know,
right, exactly.
The kids who know stuff that kids shouldn't know. And that, like, a lesbian character, Martha Dobie, doesn't know about herself, right? Until she says, it had to come back to me from the libel. It had to come back to me from the lie for me to know that there was something in me that was this. So I mean, what I like about putting it here with these others is that it does, for me, and this is my own scholarship, say that there are tensions between women that are erotic in in women's pictures often. And we didn't talk about it with Imitation of Life, but, like, why are they living together? You know, why do they raise their children together? Is that just economic necessity? You know, what do they get that they can't get elsewhere? So I do think that I like to talk about, like, the queer possibilities of things that can't be named, you know, because so much can't be named in melodrama. So they're you know, they are there.
Yeah, right.
But I like it because we get Wyler in here, who, you know, he directed a lot of really good women's pictures, but not in this time frame so much. So it's nice. So he directed the first version of the play, The Children's Hour, right? Really under the production code, so that they couldn't even say that the school fell apart because there was a rumor that the headmistresses were a couple. In that one, which was called These Three, there had to have another rumor go around, which was that one of them was also in love with the man who...
Oh, really?
Yeah. So the reason why I say that is that, like, the beauty of the unspeakable, well, I literally just was talking about it, is that anything can be you can fill in the unspeakable with anything. So These Three stars Miriam Hopkins as one of the couple, and she comes back as the aunt who really sets the whole catastrophe in motion in this film. So that's also interesting. So Wyler is kind of doing a reparative gesture for having erased the lesbian content from the earlier film.
Fascinating.
But the lesbian content in the earlier film was about whether you could make lesbian content by not talking about it, right? So, which is all to say that it's a weird time to make this film, because the play's written in the 30s, when there was a whole bunch of anxiety about college women and school mistresses and whatever, and forms of female community. And so why do we get around to making it in 1961? Is it 62?
Yeah, 61. Yeah.
And yes, because you can now say, as a quote, they say, we just had a trial in which, as the judge put it, we were accused of having sinful sexual relations with each other. So like just the convolution of that, like I'm quoting a judge of a libel trial that was about, but that's where you could say women having sinful sexual.
Yeah.
But so anyway, so it got through. But everyone knew the play. So it was like it was never hidden in the earlier version or now. So I'm a bit on a tangent here. So I think that the space of the school is a really lovely metaphor for the ways that women could make the mastery of the domestic sphere into a possible other social world, if that makes sense. So I mean, it happens in like Little Women. She's like, oh, let me do a school and it'll be progressive and it'll have all this stuff. So it's like an extension of the home that could be an extension of the prison of the home, which it is for a time in the children's hour when the rumor is spread, all the girls are withdrawn from the school, they lose the case, the libel case, and the two of them, Karen and Martha, are like wandering around the house not knowing what to do with themselves and literally using this is a very good Weiler shot too, a really good women's picture melodrama trope, which is the woman at the window. Martha's at the door watching a flatbed truck with a bunch of, let's just call them MAGA men, like standing in the back of the truck or pickup truck, but standing in the like bed, upright, weirdly upright, driving past the house, just staring at them, right? So that the domestic space that is supposed to be, the women are always looking out the window waiting for something to happen or if they could get out or whatever. And now they're being looked back in at as freaks. So what's going on in there? So I think that so it could be a prison, but it could also be a model. There could be things about reciprocity, about mutual aid, about how they share the workload, about their educational philosophy. We don't know a lot because the school gets shut down pretty quick, but there is a way in which the model of the home made larger as school, which is, very kind of what happened in the 19th century in terms of first wave feminism, could be valorized. And I'm going to stretch that and say, I think a little bit of that is what's happening with these movies, especially the ones that are about women, is that what's happening in the relations among women in the movies, or the potential for it, or even the critiques of the family that we've been talking about, can be scaled up, so that the movies offer these kind of pictures of a domestic space that you could scale up that critique, and so anyway, but it's handled, I've already mentioned and why it's a Weiler shot is that it's incredible depth of shot there, like he's using, and clearly it's a very stagey film because it's based on a play, but it's also because of the way that Weiler builds the sets and makes them like real places where people are interacting with each other spatially. And he does a lot with, foregrounding certain characters so that, whatever, that Martha is starting to recognize that she in fact does desire Karen that way. And then I guess just to jump to like the most famous shot in the movie, or the most famous sequence in the movie, is that, the domestic sphere becomes fatal for this budding lesbian character, who I guess once she realizes that she does desire Karen and that she's always been different, goes up to her room, locks her room. We see her right before, I think the last shot of her, she's kind of curled up with a blanket. And then I'm like, no, I think that's a bathrobe because there's like a rope belt around that.
Oh, yeah.
And I saw it for the first time this time. Karen, who's an incredibly interesting character, played by Audrey Hepburn, and I think maybe the Europeanness comes back here too, which is like she's not a European in the,
in the film, right? Yeah.
In the diegesis, but she has that lovely accent.
Yeah.
She kind of doesn't care that Martha is coming out to her.
Right.
But now that Martha has realized this, she retires to the closet, right? She goes to her room and locks the door, and Karen goes for a walk, and then Karen realizes that she needs to run back to the house, grabs this incredibly heavy duty candlestick that's very handy. Audrey Hepburn is frail, breaks down the door, and we have just this very famous shot of the shadow of two
legs hanging down.
Two women, two pumps, like a perfect, 1960s. Martha has this line, "I'm a sweater and skirt girl. We're always in style." It's the sweater, the skirt, and the pumps. And the pumps are just kind of like a shadow across this overturned chair and rope. And we realize that off screen, she's hung herself. We dwell very closely on Karen's absolutely, very, very poignant reaction shot to what she is seeing. And wow, that's like pretty damning of the house as prison.
Oh, yeah.
And
Well, and you hadn't mentioned, which I think is also important, just going back to Weiler and those shots, like that great shot from above, like behind Shirley MacLaine, looking out the window down to the sidewalk out in front of the house, and you see Audrey Hepburn like far in the distance. As she kind of like they turn and look at each other, and you have that again, that connection between distance, but also just the vastness of that of that space. And I think that is just another great shot to include in there to kind of represent all of that.
Absolutely. And that they have this moment, and then it's a sort of belay, and then that's melodrama, like hardcore. And now you're really making me respect like the what is done to make this less of a play on screen, because melodrama, it's always about the timing. It's either just in time or too late. And like so Karen gets this walk away from the house and then realizes she has to run back. But the movie also ends with Karen walking away from Martha's funeral. And we get a couple insert shots of like James Garner, her now ex-fiance looking at her and not being, with a classic male gaze frame, like, I am looking, and she's way in the distance, and she just walks with this like Audrey Hepburn posture. Where is she going? She's walking right out of this space where I guess the domestic melodrama is the only way to tell a woman's story. Like maybe we could tell a different story, in the 60s. Sadly, we did. And it was like the sexual revolution. And it was kind of like, it took a while for us to get to a version of that actually, I would want to claim as, maybe in the 70s. Right. We get some good ones. So
it took some time.
And I think that the Karens, not in a weird way, not unlike the George Papard character, is that like the flashy character is kind of representing some kind of, ethical take.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this has been a fascinating conversation, Patricia. Just like so many amazing films and such rich depth through all of them. And just as a note, like going from here, we've already talked so much about like the legacy of this, as far as like the soap operas and
Soaps, yeah.
the primetime melodramas that we had. And you mentioned Rainer Werner Fassbinder and Todd Haynes as a couple
Yeah.
things. We also had coming out of this in the 70s and 80s a real growth of kind of the feminist film theory legacy with Laura Mulvey and Linda Williams and all these other people. Um, and so I just think that it's important to discuss in this post-war period. And look at this.
So this one, Home is Where the Heart
Yeah.
Is, Studies on Melodrama and the Women's Picture, edited by Christine Gledhill, is kind of a great anthology. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, there's another one we'll make sure we include. But I mean, thank you so much for being here and being part of this conversation, because I think it's a rich period, and in the scope of everything we're looking at, in this mini series I've been doing with the post-war, it's an important one, and I think it's very key to look at like what was going on in the home at this time. And these films are full of so much rich storytelling in that regard.
Yeah, it's the consumerist, explosion, and you're going to see it on the screens that represent, the places where people bought all the stuff that they were being told to buy. And that's
Yeah.
different from some of the other, So a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Do you have plugs? I know you've got a couple books that you have, and you already mentioned you are on Instagram. Like, do you want to?
I'm not really on Instagram.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I mean, I am. It's P.
Yeah.
White Philly. I would like to be more. I'm of a generation of whatever. But
Yeah, I hear you.
yeah, no. I'm excited to. I'm going to the Society for Cinema and Media Studies conference next week, and that'll be fun. They're going to interview me about like my trajectory through film studies. So I was thinking of, and they collect those interviews with various people in the field who entered it at different times and, found different pathways. So, yeah.
Fantastic.
And anytime you need a paywalled article, I have an edu email address.
Good to know. Good to know. Well, I'll put links for your books and everything else in the show notes. Again, Patricia, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
All right. Let me end our streams. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We appreciate you joining us today. We don't have time for any questions, though. So, but thanks for checking it out. All right. End our